At the summit of Manhattan, where skyscrapers pierce the clouds, Ethan Caldwell reigned like a king in his glass castle. His penthouse with transparent glass walls and polished black marble floors was more than a place to live. It was a fortress, a declaration of power and control. Ethan, a white American tech billionaire, possessed everything the world could offer: wealth piled high like towers, a mind sharp as a blade, and a reputation that made the entire city hold its breath whenever his name was mentioned. But behind the brilliance, his heart was a barren land, cold and silent, locked away by a vow never to love again. 5 years ago, the woman he once loved, the one he thought would be the sole light in his world, had left without a single goodbye. She had placed a platinum ring on the kitchen counter next to a blank piece of paper, sharper than any knife. That silence shattered Ethan's trust and left scars that would never heal. Since then, he had built invisible walls around his heart, as solid as the lines of code he wrote for his tech empire. To Ethan, love had become a fantasy for the naive, a dangerous game he vowed never to play again. Ethan's life was a symphony of discipline. At precisely 5 a.m., his alarm pulled him from shallow sleep every morning. He stepped into the bathroom, letting ice-cold water run over his skin, awakening every sense, but failing to melt the chill in his soul. A black bitter espresso brewed in silence marked the start of his day. Then he would sit before his screen, his eyes scanning lines of code with the focus of a general on a battlefield. 2 hours later, meetings, innovation summits, and directives were delivered quickly. Ethan wasn't just a man, he was a machine, efficient, untouchable, revered by the world. But in those rare moments before dawn, when the city below still slept in darkness, Ethan felt an emptiness. He would stand by the giant glass window, gazing at the glittering lights like lost stars. In his hand, a glass of bourbon poured every night, but rarely sipped. His fingers trembled, not from the cold, but from something more profound, a beast growling in his chest, longing to be set free. Loneliness was not a hollow echo. It was a weight pressing on each breath, stretching every night longer than the last. Despite its splendor, the penthouse felt more like a tomb than a home. There was no laughter, no warmth, only soulless perfection. Abstract paintings hung on the walls, selected by a stranger of a designer, meant nothing to him. The piano in the corner, a gift from a business partner, gathered dust never touched. Everything in this space was arranged to project power, but nothing made it a place worth living in. Ethan knew it, but he refused to admit it. Admitting it would mean weakness which he could never forgive in himself. Sometimes memories of her, the woman who had left him, would resurface in those fleeting moments when his mind drifted. He remembered her eyes, how she smiled when the wind played with her hair, and how she once made him believe the world was worth opening up to. But the memory always ended with the image of the ring on the counter, and Ethan would clench his fist, reminding himself that love was just a lie wrapped in sweet promises. He had learned his lesson, and the price was a heart that no longer knew how to beat for anyone. The city below began to stir, horns blaring, and the rhythm of life rising like a never-ending song. But up here at the top, Ethan remained alone, staring down at the world he owned, but never truly belonged to. The bourbon in his hand remained untouched. His gaze was lost in the void, as if searching for something he dared not name. Perhaps deep in his soul, he knew this loneliness couldn't last forever. Possibly somewhere in the universe, a strange wind was beginning to blow, carrying someone who would one day break the wall he had built for far too long. Have you ever felt trapped in the very world you built? Is a place perfect but empty? Share your story with us, and together we'll explore journeys of healing through love. If you're ready to step into this story, Come along with us because here where broken hearts find the light, every story deserves to be told. Ava Thompson was already inside Ethan Caldwell's penthouse as the first light of dawn slipped between Manhattan's towering skyscrapers, painting the skyline in shades of violet and pale gold. She entered the lavish space with the quiet familiarity of someone used to the work, but her eyes carried a flame that could not be extinguished, the flame of hope. Ava, a black woman with calloused hands and a smile as radiant as Harlem's sunshine, did not belong to the world of glass walls and marble floors. Yet here she was, dressed in a simple navy uniform, scented with fabric softener, ready to transform this cold apartment into fertile ground for seeds of hard work and sincerity. Ava grew up in Harlem, where the streets were always loud, but dreams were often silent. Her home was a small apartment with walls so thin she could hear her mother's sighs after every night shift at the hospital. Her single nurse mother taught Ava that work, no matter how humble, was a way to preserve dignity. "You don't need to own the world," she used to say. "Just make the ground you stand on a better place." Those words were etched into Ava's memory, like a lullaby she carried through hard times. She worked not just to pay for her mother's medication or her younger brother Jaden's tuition, but to prove she was worthy of big dreams, the ones she had once sketched on scraps of recycled paper when hunger gnawed at her belly and street lamps were her only source of light. This job in the penthouse was an unexpected opportunity, a step up from exhausting shifts at the grocery store and laundromat. But to Ava, it wasn't just a job, but a challenge. She moved through the rooms with the care of an artist, her mop gliding over the floors like a brush on canvas. Every motion had a purpose, as if she were telling a story through each freshly cleaned corner. She paid no attention to the luxury of abstract paintings or the dusty piano in the corner. To her, they were just objects, not the home's soul. The soul, she believed, came from small but meaningful acts. As she paused by the enormous window, her eyes were drawn to the scene below. The city was waking up, cars crawling like ants under the rising sun. Somewhere out there, her mother rested, legs aching, but heart unyielding after a night shift. Jaden was studying in the library somewhere, still chasing his dream of becoming an engineer to build a better world, as he always said. Ava sighed, not from exhaustion, but from a deep longing to bring peace to those she loved. She touched the glass, feeling its coldness, and whispered, "I will make it. One day." She didn't know that Ethan was standing in the doorway at that moment, watching her from the shadows of the hallway. He entered the room in the silence of someone used to solitude without a sound or a sign. But Ava's presence, though quiet, was like a heartbeat in this lifeless space. She was unlike anyone he had ever met, not because of her appearance, but because of how she existed. She didn't bow to the luxury or flinch at the apartment's emptiness. She brought with her a kind of light Ethan couldn't define, but it made him feel as if he were seeing the sun for the first time after a long winter. Ava turned, startled to see him. Her eyes, dark and deep, met Ethan's cold blue gaze. In that moment, time seemed to pause. She didn't look away, didn't lower her head. Instead, she smiled softly, a smile both warm and proud. "Good morning, sir," she said, her voice calm but certain. "I'm Ava, starting today." Dressed in his sharp black suit, Ethan felt a strange wave run through him. "I didn't expect anyone here this early," he replied, his deep voice carrying a hint of hesitation, as if searching for words to mask his unease. "I'm Mr. Caldwell," he added after a pause, his gaze drifting over her uniform before settling on her face. She nodded, still smiling. "Thank you, Mr. Caldwell. I hope I'll do well." No flattery, no fear, only sincerity. It unsettled Ethan, but also made it impossible for him to look away. He gave a slight nod and turned to leave, but his steps slowed as he neared the end of the hallway, as if some part of him was being held back by the light Ava had brought into the room. She didn't know that in that very moment, she had planted a seed in the barren soil of Ethan's heart, a seed that in time would grow into something far greater than either of them could imagine. Have you ever met someone who made your world brighter, even for a moment? Please share your story with us, because even the smallest light can change a life. Let's continue this journey, where hearts that once stopped believing rediscover their reason to beat. Stay with us, the story has only just begun. Dawn filtered through the massive glass panes of the penthouse, casting a pale golden glow on the marble floor, as if trying to warm the coldness of the space. Ava Thompson, mop in hand, moved through the living room with the grace of a silent dance. She paid no attention to the luxury of the framed art or her reflection on the glossy floor. To Ava, this was just another patch of ground to sow with hard work, a place where she could leave her mark, even if that mark were nothing more than pristine cleanliness. She paused by the window where the city of Manhattan was slowly waking up. The skyscrapers shimmered under the early light, and far off, she imagined she could see Harlem, the place where her mother was sleeping after a night shift, and where her younger brother Jaden was dreaming of a bigger future. A faint smile appeared on her lips, though her eyes carried a hint of longing, as if silently offering a prayer for the ones she loved. She didn't hear the footsteps. Ethan Caldwell, moving with the silence of a man used to living in solitude, had appeared at the threshold. He stood in the shadowed hallway, observing Ava like a lost traveler, spotting firelight in the dark. His tailored black suit hugged his frame with a cold authority, but his blue eyes reflected something else. Curiosity, a yearning he didn't yet understand. Ava seemed out of place, her curly hair tied high and her navy uniform simple. Yet the way she stood there, confident and proud, made Ethan feel like she was the only alive presence in the lifeless apartment. Ava turned startled to see him. For a moment, time seemed to freeze. Her jet-black eyes, as deep as the Harlem night sky, met Ethan's icy blue stare. It wasn't a casual glance. It was like two flames igniting in the dark, colliding and merging, creating a heat that could not be extinguished. Ava didn't bow her head, didn't look away. She stood tall, still holding the mop, her gaze carrying a sincerity that threw Ethan off balance. "Good morning, sir," she said, her voice calm yet firm, like a river flowing through stone. "I'm Ava, starting today." Ethan, a man who controlled everything, felt a strange surge ripple. Her voice, though gentle, had a strength that made him pause, as if she had unknowingly struck a long silent chord within him. "Didn't expect anyone here this early," he replied, his deep voice carrying a slight hesitation. He tried to maintain his usual cold demeanor, but his eyes couldn't leave her. Ava's plain uniform, the faint scent of fabric softener, and how she stood unafraid, unflinching, made him feel as if he were facing a mystery he couldn't decode. "I'm Mr. Caldwell," he said. After a brief silence, his gaze drifting over her from her calloused hands to her radiant face. He waited for her to bow her head to stumble, as others did in his presence, the man who commanded a tech empire. But Ava did no such thing. She smiled a smile both warm and proud, and nodded slightly. "Thank you, Mr. Caldwell. I hope I'll do well." There was no flattery, no fear, only sincerity, as if she were speaking to an ordinary man, not a symbol of power. That unsettled Ethan, but made it impossible for him to look away. At that moment, he felt the invisible walls around his heart had developed the tiniest crack. He nodded a short gesture, then turned away. But as he walked down the hallway, his steps slowed, as if a part of him didn't want to leave the light Ava had brought. She didn't know that in that brief instant, she had planted a seed in the barren soil of Ethan's heart, a seed that over time would grow into something far greater than either of them could imagine. Ava returned to her work, the mop gliding across the floor once more, but her smile now held a subtle difference, as if she sensed a tiny shift in the air. Now hidden beyond the hallway corner, Ethan stopped and leaned against the wall. His hand instinctively reached for his chest where his heart was beating faster than usual. It was just a moment, he told himself, trying to brush off the strange feeling. But deep inside, he knew it wasn't just a moment. It was a whisper of fate, a sign that no matter how tightly he controlled his world, he couldn't stop the light from finding a way in. Have you ever experienced a moment where a glance or a simple word changed how you saw the world? Share your story with us, because those moments are the beginnings of miracles. Let's continue this journey together, where hearts once thought closed find a reason to open again. Stay with us, because this story will take you somewhere you never expected. In the days following their first encounter, Ethan Caldwell's penthouse was no longer the cold fortress it once had been. Ava Thompson, with her quiet yet radiant presence, had begun to seep into every corner of the space like sunlight filtering through the leaves of a dark forest. She worked with unwavering dedication, her mop gliding over the marble floors like a soft brushstroke, her hands gently arranging each flower into its vase, as if whispering a blessing. But what caught Ethan's attention wasn't the flawless cleanliness she brought, but the way she transformed the silence of the apartment into something alive, something warm. Ava sang while she worked gentle Harlem folk tunes, tinged with homesickness and hope. Her voice was never loud, but just enough to fill the void Ethan had once thought was permanent. Swing low, sweet chariot. She hummed, unaware that Ethan from his study had stopped typing, and sat listening, captivated. The melodies stirred a faint memory within him. Perhaps the sound of his mother's voice from his childhood, before the world had grown so complicated. But he quickly brushed it aside, reminding himself that memories were emotional traps. Ethan began to notice the little things about Ava arranging books on the shelves, not by color or size, but by some mysterious logic, as if she knew which mood matched each book. She paused by the window every morning, her gaze sweeping across the city with a subtle smile, as though she were sending a silent promise to someone far away, how she polished each item with reverence, as if they weren't just objects but part of a story. These small things unsettled Ethan, a man so accustomed to control. He didn't want to admit it, but whenever Ava was near, his heart beat faster, like an engine being restarted after years of dormancy. While Ava was dusting the bookshelf one morning, she accidentally dropped her clothes. It fluttered to the floor like a leaf. Just entering the room, Ethan quickly stooped to pick it up before she could. Their fingers brushed briefly, and a jolt passed through them both, sharp, sudden, and unmistakable. Ava looked up, her eyes meeting Ethan's, and for a moment, the world seemed to shrink, leaving only the sound of their hearts. "Thank you," she said softly, warmly. Ethan nodded, but his hand remained clenched around the cloth, as though trying to hold on to that fleeting moment. He stood up and turned away, but inside him raged a storm, a mix of longing and fear. Ethan scolded himself. He had vowed never to let anyone get close again, or let emotions breach the walls he had built around his heart. But Ava, with her sincerity and light, was making those walls tremble. The next day, he deliberately stood closer to her as she arranged flowers in the living room. "Are you always this meticulous with everything?" he asked, his voice low, but tinged with curiosity. Ava smiled, not looking up. "I learned from my mother, whatever you do, put your heart into it, even the smallest things." Her words, simple yet profound, left Ethan silent. He watched her gently smooth a lavender petal and felt a strange yearning not to possess her, but to be near the light she carried. But every step toward Ava came with a step back. Ethan was afraid. He remembered the platinum ring left on the kitchen counter, the cruel silence of his ex-lover. He remembered the sensation of his heart being ripped apart, and the vow he made as his only shield. One evening after Ava left, Ethan stood by the window with a glass of bourbon. The city below sparkled, but all he could see in his mind was her smile, voice, and eyes. "I can't let this happen," he whispered, but his voice trembled, unconvincing. He poured the bourbon down the sink, an unusual act, as if trying to silence the beast roaring inside his chest. Ava, meanwhile, told herself she didn't think much about Ethan, or at least she tried to. She liked this job, and the feeling of making a space beautiful, even cold. But she couldn't deny that Ethan's gaze, freezing as it seemed, held a deep sincerity. She could sense his loneliness, the way she used to hear the weariness in her mother's voice. "He's not what people say," she thought, recalling rumors about the ruthless billionaire. Ethan wasn't a symbol of power to her. He was simply a man with scars she didn't yet understand. The penthouse, once a tomb, now began to breathe. Ava's songs, flower arrangements, and carefully placed books were like musical notes in a new symphony. And Ethan, despite his resistance, couldn't deny that he was being drawn into the melody. A seed had sprouted, tiny but resilient, and it waited for the right moment to break through the barren soil of his heart. Have you ever felt your heart stir because of someone, not through words, but through the smallest gestures? Share that moment with us, because it's often the simplest things that change the world. Together, we'll continue this journey where light and shadow intertwine to form the most beautiful stories. Stay with us, for love always begins in the most unexpected places. The sun was setting behind the Manhattan skyline, painting the sky in brilliant shades of orange that reflected off the penthouse's glass walls like a living canvas. Ava Thompson stood in the living room, carefully arranging sprigs of lavender into a crystal vase. Her movement was gentle, like weaving a story with each petal. The room was filled with the calming scent of lavender and lemon, a magical combination that softened the usual chill of the space. Ava hummed a Harlem folk melody, her voice carrying traces of longing and hope, like a breeze sweeping through the streets where she had grown up. Ethan Caldwell had come home earlier than usual and stood silently in the doorway. He said nothing. He just watched Ava with growing curiosity. His black suit, as sharp as ever, couldn't hide the softening in his gaze. Ava, with her high-tied curls and simple navy uniform, didn't seem to belong in his world, but that very contrast made it impossible for him to look away. She wasn't like anyone he'd ever met. Not fearful, not sycophantic, just entirely herself, with an open heart and a story he longed to understand. "You're working pretty late," Ethan said, his deep voice softer than usual, as if afraid to disturb the moment. Ava turned slightly startled, then smiled warmly like Harlem sunshine. "I like to finish things properly," she replied, still holding the lavender. She placed it into the vase, gently smoothing a petal, then looked up at him. "You're home early today." Ethan raised an eyebrow, a rare smile flickering across his face. "It is my home." Ava laughed lightly, a blush coloring her cheeks. "Of course. I just meant I thought I had more time." Ethan stepped closer, the click of his polished shoes echoing across the marble floor. He stopped at the table just a few steps from Ava and looked into the vase. "You do everything like it matters," he said, his voice tinged with surprise. Ava tilted her head, her eyes lighting up. "My mother taught me that. Whether mopping a floor or arranging flowers, it becomes meaningful if you do it with heart." Her words, simple yet profound, silenced him. He looked at her not with his usual authoritative gaze, but with genuine curiosity. "You learned a lot from your mother," he said, his voice lower now, as though testing the depth of her world. Ava nodded, her eyes drifting toward the window, where the last light of sunset was fading. My mother's a nurse. She also worked nights, sometimes, days to raise me and my brother. She used to say the job doesn't define you, but how you do it does. She paused and her smile turned wistful. In Harlem, where I grew up, nothing was easy. The streets were loud, but dreams were quiet. My mother sang lullabies to drown out the shouting in the alley, and I drew on scrap paper to forget the hunger. Those drawings, they were how I held on to hope. Ethan listened, drawn in by her story. He pictured a young Ava sitting in a cramped apartment, sketching under the glow of a street lamp, her mother's lullabies wrapping around her like armor. The image pierced his heart, not out of pity, but in awe of her resilience. "You don't belong here," he said, not as an insult, but a sincere observation, as if he were astonished by her presence in his cold world. Ava met his eyes, proud and unwavering. "I belong wherever I choose to be," she replied, her voice steady like an arrow piercing through the invisible walls Ethan had built around himself. Her words left Ethan stunned. A man who controlled everything suddenly felt challenged not by confrontation, but by honesty. He wanted to say something, but the words eluded him. He nodded, his eyes still locked on her. "You're different," he said, almost in a whisper. Ava smiled again, a smile both gentle and firm. "Maybe because I'm not trying to be like anyone else." She turned to the vase, but the air between them had shifted heavier, warmer, as if a door had quietly opened. Ethan left the room, but Ava's words echoed in his mind. "I belong wherever I choose to be." For the first time in years, he questioned whether he truly belonged here, this penthouse, this tech empire, or whether it was all just a cage he'd built for himself. He stood by his office window looking down at the city, but didn't see emptiness this time. He saw the sunset, and in his mind, he saw Ava, the woman who had brought light into his darkness without even knowing it. Ava, meanwhile, continued her work, but her heart was unsettled. She could feel Ethan's loneliness, as if she were used to hearing her mother's exhaustion in her voice. She wasn't sure why he looked at her that way, with curiosity, with a hidden yearning. But she knew that deep in those blue eyes was a story untold, and somehow, without meaning, she had become part of that story. Have you ever shared a piece of your memory and felt your heart become lighter? Tell us your story, because sincere words can open doors you never expected. Together we'll continue this journey, where secrets shared become the bridges of love. Stay with us, every story deserves to be heard. Night fell over Manhattan, the city lights sparkling like a sea of stars beneath the obsidian sky. Inside Ethan Caldwell's penthouse, the glow from a single desk lamp in the library cast a warm golden light across the ebony bookshelves, starkly contrasting the cold glass and marble surrounding them. Ava Thompson stood on a small ladder, dustcloth in hand, carefully touching the worn, leather-bound books. Her loosely tied curls fell over her shoulders, glimmering under the light like a halo. She hummed a Harlem folk tune, her voice tinged with longing, like a lullaby drifting through the shadows. Ethan, unable to sleep, wandered the hallway. The glass of bourbon he had poured remained untouched on the table, a sign his mind was restless. In recent days, Ava's presence had become a melody. He couldn't shake her voice, smile, and proud words. "I belong wherever I choose," echoed in his head, like an incantation. He stopped at the threshold of the library, his figure blending into the darkness. Unaware of his presence, Ava continued working, her hand gliding over the books with reverence, as if they were fragments of memory worth preserving. "You're still working," Ethan said, his deep voice breaking the silence. Ava startled, turning quickly, her hand gripping the edge of the shelf for balance. "I wanted to finish the bookshelves before tomorrow," she replied, a shy smile spreading. Her eyes met his, And in that moment, the air grew heavy, as if both of them felt an invisible current crackling between them. Ethan stepped forward, the sound of his leather shoes tapping against the floor. Each step slow, deliberate, like he was crossing into dangerous territory. At this hour, he asked, his voice lower now, carrying curiosity, and something more profound. Ava chuckled softly, her eyes twinkling. "I figured you wouldn't notice." Ethan stopped just a few feet from her. The light cast across his face, highlighting the sharp lines and revealing a rare vulnerability. "I notice more than you think," he said, his voice like a quiet confession. Ava blinked slowly, releasing the edge of the shelf. She descended one step, but her foot slipped slightly. Instantly, Ethan reached out his hand, catching her waist and pulling her toward him. Time froze. His hand, strong yet gentle, remained at her waist, and their breaths mingled in the narrow space between them. "Careful," he murmured, his voice roughened with emotion. Ava looked up, her eyes locked on his, neither flinching nor afraid. "Can't sleep?" she asked, her voice soft and concerned, as if she were touching a wound he kept hidden. Ethan was silent, his gaze drifting across her face. Her lips, eyes, and curls framed her cheeks. "No," he admitted, his voice barely audible. "The memories. They're worse than nightmares." Ava tilted her head, her eyes gentling like wind after a storm. "You lost someone?" she asked quietly, calm but deep. Ethan nodded once, like even that movement caused him pain. "I lost a part of myself. The part that believed love could last." The raw honesty of his words stunned Ava. She stepped down to the final rung now, face to face with him, close enough for him to catch the scent of fabric softener on her shirt, mixed with lavender. "I can't erase your memories," she whispered, "but I can offer comfort, if you want it." Her gentle and open words broke through the final wall in Ethan's heart. Without thinking, he reached for her hair, his fingers brushing the soft curls. He leaned in, and then he kissed her. It was a slow kiss, full of questions, as if he were asking permission to feel again. Ava kissed him back, her lips tender, but certain, her hand clutching his shirt, pulling him closer. The kiss wasn't rushed or desperate. It was an exploration, a silent promise. Their breaths mingled, their hearts beat in sync, and at that moment, the world outside city lights, memories, pain vanished. When they pulled apart, Ethan stared into her eyes, his breath unsteady. "You made me forget the vow I once made," he whispered, trembling. Ava smiled, her hand resting over his chest, where his heart pounded furiously. "Maybe it's time for a new vow," she said, her voice gentle yet firm. They stood in the library's golden light, like two souls finally finding each other after a long journey. No matter how hard he tried to resist, Ethan knew then that Ava had become an inseparable part of his world. Ava, in her heart, felt something stir. She hadn't meant for her heart to wander, but that kiss and look made her realize Ethan was more than her employer. He was a man with scars. Without intending, she had become the light in his darkness. She left the library with a weightless heart, but a mind full of questions, as if she had stepped into a story whose ending was still unwritten. Have you ever experienced a moment that made your heart race, as if you had just found a missing piece of yourself? Share your story with us, because first kisses aren't just about lips meeting. They're the beginning of new dreams. We'll continue this journey together, where love blooms from the simplest moments. Stay with us. The story is only getting brighter. The lights of Manhattan's skyscrapers flickered like the city's heartbeat, piercing through the glass walls of the penthouse, where Ethan Caldwell and Ava Thompson were becoming more inseparable with each passing day. Since that kiss in the library, the once cold space had taken on a new warmth. gentle, subtle, yet undeniably powerful. Ava breathed life into the place with her sincerity and radiant presence. And Ethan, despite maintaining his calm exterior, couldn't deny that his heart now beat in rhythm with hers. In the following days, their connection blossomed through stolen moments, like notes in an unfinished love song. Ava began leaving small sketches on Ethan's desk, pencil drawings of the Manhattan skyline, a sprig of lavender, or sometimes just a simple curve, evoking the memory of his gaze. Unaccustomed to such tender gestures, Ethan felt a stirring in his chest each time he discovered one. One afternoon, he quietly placed a box of expensive watercolors on her shelf and a handwritten note. "You deserve the very best." When Ava opened the box, she smiled, not because of the price, but because of the rare honesty in his handwriting. They exchanged fleeting touches in the hallway and discreet smiles in the living room. Once, while Ava was dusting, Ethan stood closer than usual, and their fingers brushed as he handed her a fallen book. They both paused, eyes meeting the air stilling around them. "You make me forget what I'm doing," he said, voice low, tinged with humor. Ava laughed, her cheeks flushing. "Then I apologize, Mr. Caldwell." "Ethan," he corrected gently, his eyes lighting up. "Call me Ethan." She nodded, repeating his name with a smile, and the sound, soft but deep, made his heart ache. But this closeness, as sweet as it was, felt like a double-edged sword to Ethan. Every step toward Ava made him feel like he was losing control, a sensation both intoxicating and terrifying. He had built his life like a well-oiled machine, everything planned and precise, from his schedule to his emotions. Love to him was a painful lesson marked by the ring left on the kitchen counter and the brutal silence of a former lover. He had vowed never to let his heart stray again. Yet Ava, with her Harlem lullabies and proud, unflinching gaze, was shattering every rule he lived by. One evening, Ethan came home late, his mind weary after a long day of meetings. He entered the living room and found Ava dancing alone, the dim light casting her like a vivid painting. She twirled with open arms, as if embracing the world. A jazz melody from a small speaker filled the air, and Ava, smiling freely, looked like she belonged not to the cold penthouse, but to somewhere bigger, brighter. Ethan stood still, heart pounding. He wanted to run to her to take her hand and join the dance, but fear rose like a crashing wave. "I'm losing control," he thought, and the idea rooted him in place, fists clenched. Ava sensed his presence and stopped, her breath uneven. "I didn't know you were here," she said, her cheeks glowing under the light. Ethan stepped forward, his voice low and tight. "You make everything too real." Ava tilted her head, curiosity in her eyes. "Too real how?" He shook his head, unable to explain. "You make me forget who I am." The confession left Ava silent. She stepped closer, her voice a lullaby. "Maybe you don't need to be anyone but yourself," she said. But Ethan turned away, his heart in chaos. He returned to his office, shut the door, and stood by the window staring at the city. The lights glittered, but all he saw was Ava, dancing free and radiant. He poured a glass of bourbon down the sink, as if trying to silence the roaring beast inside his chest. "I can't let this happen," he whispered, but even he didn't believe his words. Deep down he knew that Ava had become an indelible part of his world, no matter how hard he tried. Ava, meanwhile, felt a sweet confusion stirring within her. She hadn't meant to let her heart drift, but those moments with Ethan, the brushed hands, the notes his eyes made her realize he wasn't just a powerful man. He was someone with scars, and she unintentionally had become the light in his darkness. As she left the penthouse that night, her heart felt light, but her mind swirled with questions, like she was walking a path without a visible destination. Have you ever felt your heart flutter for someone, but fear held you back? Share your story with us, because those moments of hesitation, of silent longing, make love all the more beautiful. We'll continue this journey together, where light and darkness intertwine to create unforgettable melodies. Stay with us, because this story leads us to something truly magical. Morning sunlight poured through the penthouse windows, casting a golden glow across the marble floor, as if trying to hold Ava Thompson in an embrace, while she stood quietly by the glass. She wore her familiar navy uniform, but her eyes deep as the Harlem night sky carried a faraway look. In her hand was an old phone, its screen aglow with a newly received email from the International Arts Program in Paris. It was an invitation to attend a 12-month course alongside some of the world's most renowned artists, an opportunity that had once lived only in her sketches on recycled paper during hunger-filled nights in Harlem. But the initial joy was quickly swallowed by a rising wave of anxiety. Ava knew this dream could pull her away from Ethan Caldwell, the man who had become a light in her world, even if she had never dared admit it aloud. Ava had grown up using art as her only escape from the cramped apartment, where her mother's sighs and arguments outside the window were constant background noise. She had once promised herself that someday she would stand in a gallery where her paintings would tell Harlem's story, one of resilience, hope, and love. The Paris opportunity was the first real step toward fulfilling that promise. But her heart now felt torn. Ethan, with his vulnerable gaze and sincere gestures, had made her feel valued not for her talent, but for who she was. How could she leave him? Leave behind those precious moments, the sketches she left him, the watercolor set he gifted, the kiss they shared in the library. She slipped the phone into her pocket and tried to focus on her work. The mop glided across the floor, but her thoughts were elsewhere. She thought of her mother, who said, "Never give up on your dreams, Ava. They're what keep you alive." She thought of Jaden, her younger brother, studying to become an engineer, constantly reminding her she deserved the world. But she also thought of Ethan, how he said her name and stood a little closer each day, as if she were the flame that warmed his darkness. Ava sighed, pressing her hand against the cold glass. "What should I do?" she whispered, unaware that Ethan was watching her from the hallway. Back early from a morning meeting, Ethan immediately noticed the change in Ava. She still worked with the same dedication, but her smile didn't shine as it used to, and her eyes seemed distant. He had learned how to read her the small tells, like how she twirled her hair when anxious or hummed less when burdened. He stepped into the living room, his polished shoes echoing on the floor. "Are you all right, Ava?" he asked, his deep voice gentle with concern. She startled, then turned and managed a faint smile. "Just thinking about some things," she replied, hesitating. Ethan came closer, his eyes fixed on her. "You seem distant today," he said, not accusing, but as an invitation to share. Ava looked down, her hands gripping the mop. "I'm just thinking about possibilities," she answered, choosing her words carefully. Ethan tilted his head, his gaze sharp but soft. "What kind of possibilities?" Ava shook her head, her smile fading. "Just old dreams and new things." She turned away and resumed her work. But Ethan felt the invisible wall between them, something he couldn't quite name, but it made his chest tighten. That night, after Ava had gone home, Ethan walked into the library where she often organized books. He intended to leave her a note, the kind of silent conversation they had come to share. But a white envelope fell to the floor while shifting a stack of books. Bold letters read, "International Arts Program." His heart froze. He picked it up, hands trembling slightly, and skimmed the contents. The invitation to Paris, the chance that could change Ava's life, lay before him like a blade. He returned the envelope, but his mind was reeling. He remembered the ring on the kitchen counter, the silence of his former lover, and now the fear of losing Ava surged like a storm. She's going to leave, he thought, and the idea made breathing hard. Ava sat at her kitchen table in a small apartment in Harlem, staring at the email on her phone. Jaden, her younger brother, noticed her unease. "What's wrong, Ava?" he asked. She sighed and told him about the opportunity in Paris and Ethan. "I don't know what to choose," she confessed. Jaden took her hand. "You deserve your dream. But if he truly matters, he'll understand." His words were comforting but couldn't chase away the storm inside her. Ava looked out the window at the flickering Harlem lights and wondered, could she keep both her dream and her love? Have you ever stood at a crossroads between love and a long-cherished dream? Please share your story with us, because sometimes the hardest choices lead to the most beautiful answers. Together we'll continue this journey, where hearts search for the path between light and shadow. Stay with us because the story is about to enter its most emotional trials yet. Rain drizzled against the glass walls of the penthouse, like the tears of Manhattan's sky. In the living room, dim lighting cast a soft glow over Ava Thompson as she slowly rearranged books on a shelf, her every movement deliberate, as if stalling something inevitable. Her navy uniform, usually neat and pressed, was slightly disheveled, a reflection of her inner turmoil. The email from the International Arts Program in Paris still flickered in her mind, a flame both warming and burning her. She hadn't made a decision, but every time she thought about leaving Ethan Caldwell, her heart tightened, as if bound by an invisible string. Ethan entered his silhouette stretching across the marble floor. After discovering the envelope in the library, he had spent the entire night battling a storm of emotion. The fear of losing Ava mingled with memories of the ring on the kitchen counter, left behind by his ex-lover, had stripped away his usual cold composure. His blue eyes, usually sharp and unreadable, now shimmered with hurt and restrained anger. He held the envelope in his hand, his fingers clenched so tightly they'd turned white. "Ava," he said, his voice low but sharp, like a blade slicing the air. Ava turned, her eyes widening at the sight of the envelope. Her heart dropped, as though the ground had just given way beneath her. "Ethan," she whispered, but he raised a hand, stopping her words. "Why didn't you say anything?" he asked, his voice trembling, not from weakness, but from the anger rising inside him. "You were going to leave. Leave everything. Leave me without a word." Ava shook her head and stepped closer, her hands trembling. "I haven't decided," she said, her voice urgent. I need time to think." "Time?" Ethan laughed bitterly, the sound dry and pained. "You kept it from me, Ava. You made me believe." He trailed off, his eyes scanning her face, searching for a sign that this was all a misunderstanding. "You made me believe we had something real." Ava felt her eyes sting with tears. She stepped closer, her voice breaking. "We do have something real, Ethan. But this is my dream. I've worked my whole life for this opportunity. Before I met you, it was all I had." Ethan stepped back, as if her words had cut him. "And what about me?" he asked, his voice dropping to a whisper. "I opened my heart for the first time in years. And now you're planning to leave, just like she did." Ava blinked, and a tear slid down her cheek. "Don't compare me to her," she said, her voice trembling but firm. "This isn't betrayal. I never meant to hurt you." Ethan looked at her pain, etched deep in his gaze. "But you did." The air between them was heavy, like a fragile sheet of glass about to shatter. Ava stepped forward, reaching a hand out to him. Ethan, please, I haven't accepted Paris yet. I need. But Ethan cut her off, his voice rising full of emotion. What do you need, Ava? To leave me, to walk away from this life. If you want to go, go. But don't give me hope to crush it. Ava shook her head, more tears falling. You're asking me to choose between my dream and you. That's not love, Ethan. That's control. Her words, sharp and honest, stunned Ethan. He stepped back, letting the envelope fall to the floor. I gave you everything, he said, his voice hoarse. Ava moved closer, her eyes filled with sorrow but strength. You gave me a beautiful world, but I never asked for it all. I just wanted you to understand me. Ethan turned away, his jaw tight. Maybe I was wrong to think I could keep you. Ava felt her heart break. She wanted to embrace him to bridge the widening space between them, but the pain in his eyes made her freeze. Don't say that, she whispered. He looked at her, his eyes now a wall. You should go, he said, his voice cold but trembling. Think it through. Decide. Ava shook her head, tears streaming down her face. I don't want to decide alone. But Ethan replied, his voice barely audible. You already have. That night, Ava packed a small suitcase, and each item she placed inside felt like a slice of her heart. She entered the elevator, glancing upward, hoping to see Ethan at the window. But only darkness stared back. As the doors closed, it felt like the world collapsed around her. The rain fell harder outside, like the sky was weeping with her. Inside the penthouse, Ethan stood silently by the window, watching the storm. The envelope still lay on the floor, a haunting reminder of what he had just lost. I swore I'd never let this happen again, he whispered, his voice breaking into the sound of rain. Have you ever said words that hurt your heart just because you were afraid to lose someone you love? Share your story with us, because even the deepest cracks can lead to healing. Together, we continue this journey where pain and love intertwine to create unforgettable moments. Stay with us, because hope still lingers on the horizon. Rain poured relentlessly over Manhattan, hammering against the penthouse glass, like blows from a storm flooding the silence Ethan Caldwell had once found comfort in. But now that silence was no longer a refuge. It was a prison, trapping him in the ache of losing Ava Thompson. Once warmed by her Harlem folk songs and scattered sketches, the apartment now felt as cold and lifeless as a tomb. The envelope from the International Arts Program still lay on the living room floor, like an accusation. Ethan stood at the window, staring into the rain, but in his mind, all he could see was Ava, her proud smile, soulful eyes, and the tears that clung to her lashes as she walked away. In the days following their argument, Ethan sank into a void. He abandoned his 5 a.m. routine, let his coffee go cold, and ignored the mountain of work emails. He rewatched security footage to catch glimpses of Ava dusting, arranging flowers, humming her songs. Each image was a blade, a reminder that he had pushed her away because of his fear. He remembered her words. That's not love, Ethan. That's control. The truth in them pierced through the wall he had built around his heart, forcing him to confront what he had done. One evening in the library, Ethan came across a book Ava had organized. Tucked inside was a sketch, a simple pencil drawing of two figures holding hands, with two small children between them, labeled "One Day" in her delicate handwriting. The image didn't break him, it awakened him. Ava hadn't walked away from him. She had walked away from the weight of a choice they both feared. At that moment, Ethan understood that love didn't mean tethering her dreams to his. It meant building a future big enough for both of their dreams to coexist. Meanwhile, Ava sat in her brother Jaden's cramped Harlem apartment. The Paris offer lay open on the coffee table, its printed words blurring into the storm outside. She had read it every night, telling herself she needed time. But time without Ethan didn't bring peace. It only deepened the ache. She missed his quiet presence, the way he said her name, the way his hand brushed hers like a promise unspoken. "He didn't even try to stop me," she whispered. Jaden squeezed her hand. "Maybe he didn't know how, Ava. But if he loves you, he'll find a way." The rain intensified, drumming harder on the windows when a knock came at the door. Ava opened it and froze. Ethan stood there, drenched to the bone, with no umbrella or driver, just him. His eyes locked onto hers with a desperation that took her breath away. His hair clung to his forehead, water dripping from his coat, but his gaze was unwavering. "I don't have a speech," he rasped, his voice hoarse from the cold and the emotion. "And I don't want to argue." Ava's voice trembled. "Then why are you here?" He exhaled shakily. "Because I was wrong. I made you feel like love was a leash, like you had to choose between me and your dream. It's not." He stepped closer, rain puddling at his feet. "I shouldn't have asked you to stay. I should have asked how I could help you go." Ava's eyes welled with tears. "I didn't want to leave you," she whispered. "I just needed to know if we could survive this." Ethan's gaze softened. "I don't want to be the man who builds a world without the woman who gave him a reason to live in it." He reached out his hand, trembling as it touched her cheek. "If you want to go to Paris, I'll help you pack. I'll write to you every day. I'll wait, Ava, for as long as it takes. But if even a small part of you wants to stay, say it now." Ava looked into his eyes, tears and rain mixing on her face. "I never left to run from you," she said, voice steady. "I left to see if we were stronger than my fear." Ethan's voice broke. "And are we?" She took his hand, her fingers warm against his icy skin. "Yes." They stood there in the doorway of the tiny apartment, the rain falling like a curtain around them, sealing them in a moment of raw truth. Ethan pulled her into his arms, holding her like he never wanted to let go. Ava clung to him, resting her cheek against his chest, where his heart beat like a second chance. The storm outside faded into background noise. All that remained was the promise of a beginning, rewritten in forgiveness and love. Have you ever taken a leap of faith to fight for someone you love, even when it meant facing your fears? Share your story with us, for it's in these moments of courage that love finds its most valid form. Join us as we continue this journey, where broken hearts mend and new dreams are born. Stay with us, for the story is far from over. The rain had stopped, leaving Manhattan wrapped in a soft mist, as if the city had just taken a deep breath after weeping. In a small Harlem apartment, Ava Thompson sat beside Ethan Caldwell on an old armchair, a thin blanket draped around them. The warmth from a chamomile tea on the table mingled with the earthy scent of rain drifting through the open window. Just hours earlier, they had stood in the doorway holding each other in the downpour, dissolving the distance that fear and silence had carved between them. Now they faced each other in the quiet room, not with blame, but with unspoken promises. Ava, her curls cascading around her shoulders, looked at Ethan with deep and soft eyes, like the Harlem sky after a storm. Now dry from his rain-soaked clothes, Ethan held her hand tightly, fingers interlaced, as if afraid she might vanish. "Ava," he began low but steady, "I need to tell you something." She tilted her head, a gentle smile curving her lips. "You've already said so much, Ethan. I'm listening." But the look in his eyes, steadfast yet vulnerable, made her heart race. "I was wrong," he said, his voice rasping. "I thought love meant keeping you close, protecting you from the world. But I realize now that love means standing beside you wherever you go, Paris, Harlem, or anywhere you choose." Ava blinked, her eyes shimmering with tears. Ethan, she whispered, but he raised a hand gently asking to finish. I don't want you to give up your dream for me, but I also can't imagine a future that doesn't have you in it. He took a deep breath, then knelt before her, still holding her hand. Ava froze, her breath catching. I don't have a ring, he said, trembling slightly. I didn't have time to prepare. I don't even know what style you'd like. But I know what I want: a life with you, through the ordinary and the extraordinary. I want to see you paint, to hear you laugh, to watch you sing Harlem lullabies to our children. He paused, locking eyes with her. Ava Thompson, will you give me the honor of spending forever by your side? Tears spilled down Ava's cheeks, but her smile shone like sunlight. She pulled him up, cradling his face in her hands. Ethan, she whispered, I don't need a ring. I need you, the man who stood in the rain for me, who looks at me like I'm his whole world. She drew a breath, a flicker of excitement in her eyes. But before I answer, you need to know something. She pulled out a hospital appointment card from her coat pocket, handing it to him with trembling fingers. Ethan frowned, took the card, and his eyes widened as he read the line. Ultrasound. Pregnancy, he whispered, voice unsteady. Ava nodded, her smile shy, but radiant. I thought it was stress. Then I was late. And later, yesterday, the doctor confirmed it. Twins. Ethan stood frozen, the card slipping from his fingers. Twins, he repeated, as if he couldn't believe it. Then, like a wave, joy surged through him. He pulled Ava into his arms, holding her so tightly she laughed through her tears. I used to think I'd die alone, he said, voice thick, his face buried in her hair. And now, I'm standing here with you, and two miracles I never dared to dream of. Ava lifted her head and kissed him softly. We're not alone anymore, Ethan, she whispered. Not ever again. They sat back on the armchair, hands entwined, the blanket wrapped around them like a vow. The Harlem lights blinked outside the window like stars bearing witness to their love. Ava turned to him, her voice steady. I declined Paris this morning, she said. Ethan looked at her, surprised. Why? That was your dream. She smiled, placing her hand over his heart. Dreams can change. When I applied, I thought I needed the world's approval. But with you, I feel whole. I don't need to prove anything anymore. Ethan pulled her close, overwhelmed with gratitude. You make the world bigger. Ava, he murmured, voice tight with emotion. They sat there in the stillness of Harlem, knowing they had come through darkness to find one another. Their love, though imperfect, was a fire that would burn on, lighting the way for all the days to come. Have you ever found love so profound that it redefined your dreams? Please share your story with us for these moments of connection. Make life extraordinary. Join us as we continue this journey, where love builds homes from broken promises. Stay with us, for the story is blossoming into something incredible. 2 years had passed, and Manhattan remained a canvas of glittering skyscrapers. But the world had changed entirely inside the penthouse of Ethan Caldwell and Ava Thompson. What was once a cold fortress was now filled with children's laughter, like cheerful music echoing through the glass walls. At the center of the nursery, their twin children, Liam and Lila, rolled on the soft rug, their tight curls bouncing every time they tumbled. Their names, embroidered on pastel bibs, carried meanings of strength and hope, a reminder of their parents' journey to bring them into this world. Ethan, once a billionaire who lived like a machine, now sat cross-legged on the floor, his white shirt sleeves rolled up, his hair messy from Lila tugging on it. He held Liam on his knee, trying to tell a story about dragons and light he made up on the spot, but the boy laughed and smacked his cheek. With eyes as bright as her mother's, Lila climbed onto his back, demanding to fly higher. Ethan laughed a free, unburdened laugh he never knew he had, and lifted Lila into the air, spinning her. There were no more 5 a.m. schedules, no more bourbon glasses, only the simple joy of a father who had found meaning in his children's laughter. From the doorway, Ava watched the scene, her heart full. She had just returned from a gallery in Harlem, where her latest painting, a watercolor of Liam, her mother, and Ethan under a Harlem sunset, was being exhibited. It told a story of motherhood and second chances. She no longer mopped floors or arranged flowers for others. Now she painted her dreams, every brushstroke, a declaration of her journey from hardship to happiness. She hadn't gone to Paris, but hadn't given up either. She had redefined her dream, finding fulfillment in love and creation. That evening, after bathing, Liam and Lila, Ethan and Ava sat together in the living room, bathed in the soft glow of a vanilla candle. Liam, in his high chair, tried to smear applesauce onto Lila's face, making Ava laugh as she wiped their cheeks with a soft cloth. Ethan shook his head, pretending to be stern. "This one's just like you, Ava, always causing trouble." Ava raised an eyebrow, tossing the cloth at him. "Excuse me, I was an extremely tidy child." Ethan leaned in, kissing her forehead. "But a wonderfully messy woman." Liam and Lila clapped, delighted by their parents' joy, even if they didn't understand the words. When the children were finally asleep, Ethan and Ava sat by the large window, sipping chamomile tea and gazing over the city. Manhattan's lights twinkled, but they no longer felt distant. "I used to stand here and feel nothing," Ethan said softly. "Like those lights weren't meant for me." Ava tilted her head, lacing her fingers through his. "And now," he looked at her, his eyes shining. "Now, I see a future I want to live for you, Liam and Lila." Ava smiled, squeezing his hand. "I used to think love was a destination. Turns out it's the home we build from broken pieces." They stood and walked into the nursery, where Liam and Lila slept soundly. Ethan adjusted Lila's blanket, while Ava gently stroked Liam's hair. The children rested peacefully, their little faces serene, as if they already knew they were loved, chosen. Ethan wrapped his arm around Ava's waist and whispered, "This is the only legacy I care about." Ava leaned into him and replied, "Then I think we've done it." They stepped out quietly, turning off the light and leaving only the soft glow of a nightlight behind a gentle promise of peace in the days ahead. The love between Ethan and Ava wasn't perfect, but it was real. They had learned to face their fears, to build a home from shattered vows and ordinary moments. Years later, when Liam and Lila would ask how their parents met, Ethan and Ava would smile and tell the story of a woman with calloused hands who brought light to a heart of stone, and a man who tore down his walls to learn how to love again. They would speak of painful but necessary choices, and how love doesn't save you from life, but gives you the strength to live it. Have you ever built a home from love where every laugh and tear becomes a brick in its foundation? Please share your story with us. These moments make life a masterpiece. Join us in celebrating this journey where love transforms broken pieces into something whole. Stay with us, for every story deserves a beautiful ending.